New York, a city that never sleeps, yet in its heart lies a place where time seems to have frozen, where silence is not peace but an omen. Deep within the abandoned St. Magnus Hospital, there is a room sealed off from the world, operating room number 6. A room that once bustled with life-saving surgeries but now carries a chilling legacy. Shadows that move without origin, whispers echoing through empty corridors, and the man in the long coat. He never left. We will uncover the terrifying tale of St. Magnus, the experiments that defied nature, and the haunted room no one dares to enter. But beware, some mysteries don't want to be revealed. Stay with us until the end, because what you hear might just keep you awake at night. The ghost in operating room number 6. Amid the bustling and energetic modernity of New York, lies a dark corner where time seems to stand still. St. Magnus Hospital, with its gray, moss-covered walls, sits quietly in an abandoned neighborhood, long forgotten by the world. Once a beacon of hope and healing, the hospital is now a shadow of its former self, shrouded in tales that send chills down the spines of those who dare to remember. The most infamous of these tales centers around operating room number 6, a room whose name no one dares to utter after nightfall. In the 1920s, St. Magnus Hospital was built as a symbol of medical advancement. Its doctors were among the best in the field, armed with state-of-the-art equipment for their time. Among them, Dr. Henry Albright stood out as a celebrated surgeon and a pioneer in the study of life and death. But things began to change in the 1940s. While the world outside was consumed by war, St. Magnus became a secret hub for experiments the government didn't want the public to know about. At the center of it all was operating room number 6, where Dr. Henry conducted his bizarre and controversial research. Rumor had it that Henry believed life did not end with death. In secret, he performed surgeries with the aim of reanimating patients who had passed away. But those patients were never seen again. They simply vanished, as if they had never existed. In 1952, Dr. Henry was found dead inside operating room number 6. Strangely, his body was dismembered, yet no evidence pointed to anyone else being present. The official report claimed it was a suicide, but no one believed it. A nurse recalled hearing horrifying screams from the room that night, but by the time she arrived, the door was locked tight. After Henry's death, the hospital began to decline. Strange stories circulated. Footsteps echoing in the basement corridors, faint lights flickering inside operating room number 6, and the figure of a man in a long coat standing silently in the corner of the room. By 1985, St. Magnus was shut down, leaving the basement as a doorway to unending darkness. In 2023, Rachel Moore, a young investigative journalist, stumbled upon the tale of St. Magnus in an old article. Driven by a thirst for truth and the allure of fame, she decided to investigate operating room number 6. She reached out to Margaret, a retired nurse who had worked at the hospital. Initially hesitant, Margaret eventually agreed to take Rachel to the basement of St. Magnus. "You won't like what you find," Margaret warned. But Rachel, fueled by curiosity and ambition, paid no heed. They arrived at the hospital on a chilly autumn night. The pale moonlight cast eerie shadows across the crumbling walls of St. Magnus, making it look like a sleeping beast. Margaret led Rachel down into the basement, where the air grew colder and heavier with every step. The door to operating room number 6, locked tight for decades, seemed almost to beckon them. Margaret unlocked it, and Rachel felt a wave of icy air engulf her as the door creaked open. The room was pitch dark, but when Rachel turned on her flashlight, its beam revealed old surgical tools, decaying furniture, and bloodstains still visible on the operating table. She felt the distinct sensation of being watched, but when she turned around, there was nothing there. As they ventured further into the room, strange phenomena began to unfold. One of Rachel's cameras glitched, emitting distorted noises. A faint whisper echoed from a shadowed corner of the room. Margaret's face turned pale as she muttered, "We shouldn't be here." Rachel discovered an old drawer, and inside it, a dusty journal wrapped in cobwebs. It was Dr. Henry's personal notebook. In it, he detailed his experiments and wrote cryptic entries such as, "They are waiting for me. I cannot stop." As Rachel read the final page, the room's lights began to flicker. A tall, shadowy figure appeared in the dim light, a man in a long coat with eyes glowing like embers. Margaret screamed, "Run!" But Rachel stood frozen in place, unable to tear her gaze away from the figure. It moved closer, and she felt an icy hand grip her shoulder. The cold seeped into her bones, stealing her breath away. Margaret yanked Rachel out of the room, and they bolted through the dark corridor. But the sound of footsteps behind them refused to relent. As they emerged from the basement, the door slammed shut on its own, and an agonized scream echoed from within. Shaken and terrified, Rachel dared not look back. But when she checked the journal later, it had vanished, as though it had never existed. After that harrowing night, Rachel abandoned her career as a journalist. She moved to a small town and never spoke of Saint Magnus again. But every night, in her dreams, she saw the shadowy man with fiery eyes standing in the darkness, whispering into her ear, "I've found you." To this day, the story of Operating Room Number 6 continues to haunt New York. Urban explorers who have ventured into the hospital never dared to stay overnight. Those who made it out alive spoke of a chilling voice in the basement warning them, "You shouldn't be here." The Midnight Whispers. In the sprawling deserts of Texas, where the nights are vast and eerily silent, there stands a hospital with a haunting reputation. St. Hilaria's General Hospital, built decades ago as a beacon of hope for the surrounding rural communities, now carries a chilling legend, one that nurses and doctors whisper about only when the sun sets. The most unsettling of these stories revolves around the emergency room, or ER4, a room that has long been empty but is far from abandoned. It began with a single report. Maria Lopez, a young night shift nurse, had worked at St. Hilaria's for nearly a year when she first encountered the strange phenomenon. It was a quiet Wednesday night, the kind of shift where time dragged on endlessly. Around 3 a.m., as Maria was reviewing patient files in the nurse's station, a faint whisper caught her attention. It was so soft. She thought at first it was the wind brushing against the hospital's old windows, but the whisper grew louder, distinct enough for her to hear words. "Help me!" Maria's stomach knotted. The sound seemed to come from ER4, a room that hadn't been in use for years. It was locked, its equipment removed, and marked for future renovations. Cautiously, she walked down the dimly lit hallway toward the door. The whispers stopped abruptly as she approached. When she opened the door, the room was empty. No sign of anyone. Shaking it off as exhaustion, Maria returned to her desk, only to find herself compelled to check the security footage. What she saw chilled her to the bone. A faint shadow gliding down the hallway outside ER4, vanishing into the walls. Maria wasn't the only one to experience the strange happenings. Over the years, countless staff members had reported similar incidents. Whispers at exactly 3 a.m., fleeting shadows, and the sensation of being watched. Some said they felt a sudden drop in temperature whenever they passed by the room. Others avoided the hallway entirely, especially during the night shift. ER4 wasn't always this way. Years ago, it had been the busiest room in the hospital, saving lives day after day. But everything changed after a tragic incident in 1997. On a stormy summer night, the hospital received an emergency call about a horrific car crash. A family of 4 was brought into ER4, but despite the efforts of the medical team, none of them survived. Witnesses later claimed that the father, who had been critically injured but conscious, muttered something strange with his dying breath, "We'll never leave." After that night, strange things began to happen. Medical equipment malfunctioned without explanation. Lights flickered. Patients admitted to ER4 often reported seeing people who weren't there. Eventually, the hospital administration decided to close the room and move all emergency operations to other parts of the building. But the whispers persisted. Maria couldn't let the whispers go. She became obsessed with understanding what was happening in ER4. She began speaking with older staff members and digging into the hospital's records. What she found only deepened the mystery. One janitor, Mr. Hernandez, told her a chilling story. Back in the early 2000s, I was cleaning the ER late one night. As I passed ER4, I heard a woman crying inside. I thought it was strange since the room wasn't being used. When I opened the door, the crying stopped. But as I turned to leave, I swear I felt someone breathing down my neck. Maria also discovered that the hospital had sealed certain records regarding the family involved in the 1997 crash. The files hinted at a history of domestic violence, but the details were redacted. Why would the hospital cover it up? And could the whispers be connected to the family's tragic deaths? Determined to uncover the truth, Maria decided to set up an experiment. She borrowed a motion sensor camera from security and placed it outside ER4 one night during her shift. She also carried a digital recorder, hoping to capture the whispers. It was 2:55 a.m. when Maria began to feel the air grow cold. She was sitting at her desk, staring at the monitor connected to the motion sensor camera. The hallway outside ER4 was empty, silent. Then, at exactly 3 a.m., the whispers began. This time they were louder, more urgent. "Help me. Save us." Why? Maria's heart raced as the camera feed flickered. She saw the shadow again, but this time it lingered longer, forming a distinct shape. A tall figure with indistinct features. The shadow moved toward the door of ER4 and seemed to dissolve into it. Suddenly, Maria's recorder picked up a loud, anguished scream. She jumped to her feet, clutching the recorder, her hands trembling. She debated whether to investigate ER4, but before she could make a decision, the hallway lights began to flicker violently. Then, the door to ER4 creaked open on its own. Maria mustered the courage to approach the room. The whispers had stopped, replaced by an oppressive silence. Inside, the air was freezing. As she shone her flashlight around, she noticed something she hadn't seen before. Words scratched into the walls. They were faint but legible. "Help us. Trapped. Never leave." In the center of the room, the outline of a handprint appeared on the dust-covered floor, as if someone had pressed their palm there moments ago. Maria turned to leave, but the door slammed shut behind her. The whispers returned, louder than ever, overlapping and frantic. She felt a sudden weight on her chest, as though invisible hands were pushing her down. Desperate, she shouted, "What do you want?" The whispers stopped, replaced by a single voice, a deep guttural tone that said, "Justice." At that moment, the door flew open, and Maria stumbled out, gasping for air. She didn't stop running until she reached the security station. The footage from the motion sensor camera was blurry, but clear enough to see the shadow entering ER4. The recorder captured every whisper, scream, and the chilling final word, "Justice." Maria took the evidence to the hospital administration, but they dismissed it, claiming it was a fabrication or technical glitch. Unable to continue working there, Maria quit her job, but she couldn't escape the whispers. Even after moving to another city, she would wake up at exactly 3 a.m., hearing the faint plea, "Help me." To this day, ER4 remains locked, but the legend of St. Hilara's persists. Staff members still report hearing whispers near the room, and some claim to see shadows flitting across the hallway in the dead of night. No one dares to investigate further. Visitors to the hospital sometimes ask about the eerie hallway, and the staff always respond with the same warning: "Don't be here at 3 a.m. But for those who've heard the whispers, the question lingers. What happened in ER4 that night in 1997? And why do the voices of the dead still cry out for justice? The haunted bed, California, with its sun-drenched beaches and glamorous cities, also hides corners shrouded in darkness and mystery. Among its bustling metropolises lies the Redwood Memorial Hospital, an unassuming yet essential institution serving the community for decades. But within its walls, deep in the intensive care unit, ICU, there is a bed with a terrifying reputation, Bed 7. Whispers of its curse have traveled far and wide among the hospital staff. Patients who rest on this bed often report seeing a shadowy figure standing at the foot of their bed at night. Many of them don't live to see the sunrise. This is the story of Bed 7 and the dark presence that refuses to leave. The legend of Bed 7 began with tragedy. In 1994, a young woman named Emily Parker was admitted to the ICU following a horrific car accident. She suffered severe internal injuries and was placed on Bed 7 due to its proximity to the nurses' station. Despite the medical team's best efforts, Emily's condition deteriorated rapidly. On her final night, a nurse named Clara Jones heard her screaming hysterically. When Clara rushed into the room, Emily was sitting upright, trembling with terror. "He's here," Emily shrieked, pointing to the foot of her bed. "He's waiting for me." Clara saw nothing but dismissed it as delirium caused by Emily's critical state. Hours later, Emily passed away, but her final words, "He's here," echoed in Clara's mind. Months passed, and Bed 7 continued to be used without incident until the second death. This time, it was an elderly man named Harold Bennett, admitted for severe pneumonia. Harold was stable, and doctors expected him to recover. But on his third night, Harold began to grow agitated, pressing the call button repeatedly and telling nurses he wasn't alone. "He's standing there watching me," Harold whispered in fear. "He doesn't want me here." The next morning, Harold was found lifeless. The cause of death baffled doctors. There was no medical explanation for his sudden demise. From then on, every patient placed in Bed 7 reported the same chilling experience, a shadowy figure at the foot of the bed. Some described it as a tall man with indistinct features. Others felt only an oppressive presence. And in nearly every case, the patient's condition would worsen inexplicably, leading to their death within days. By the late 1990s, rumors of Bed 7 spread among the hospital staff. Nurses avoided assigning patients to the bed whenever possible, and doctors dismissed the claims as superstition. But those who worked the night shifts told a different story. Linda Matthews, a seasoned nurse, recalled an incident that still haunted her. "It was a quiet night, and I was making rounds in the ICU. When I passed Bed 7, I saw someone standing there, a man, tall and dark, just staring down at the bed. I thought it was a visitor, but when I stepped into the room, it was empty. I checked the cameras later, and there was no record of anyone entering or leaving." A janitor named Miguel Garcia, who often cleaned the ICU at night, claimed he would sometimes hear faint whispers coming from the room when it was unoccupied. "It always felt colder near that bed," Miguel said, "like something was there, waiting." In 2003, the hospital administration decided to look into the growing number of deaths associated with Bed 7. A committee reviewed patient records and found an alarming trend. Patients assigned to Bed 7 had a significantly higher mortality rate compared to other ICU beds. Though the data was compelling, the hospital's official stance was that these were coincidences. However, a few staff members were not convinced. Among them was Dr. Evelyn Carter, a young and determined resident fascinated by the supernatural. Evelyn believed there was more to the story and decided to investigate on her own. Evelyn spent hours poring over hospital archives and discovered that the ICU wing had been built over the remains of an old building, a mental asylum that had burned down in the 1930s. The asylum's records detailed a violent patient named Thomas Grayson, who was infamous for his fits of rage and disturbing behavior. He died in the fire, reportedly trapped in the same area where Bed 7 now stood. Convinced that the spirit of Thomas Grayson was connected to the haunting, Evelyn set out to gather evidence. With permission from a skeptical hospital administrator, she arranged for a camera to be placed in the ICU, focused specifically on Bed 7. Evelyn also decided to stay overnight in the ICU to observe any unusual activity firsthand. The night started uneventfully. The ICU was quiet, the only sounds coming from the steady beeping of monitors. But as the clock struck midnight, the temperature in the room seemed to plummet. Evelyn felt a chill run down her spine and noticed frost forming on the window near Bed 7. At exactly 2:47 a.m., the camera began to glitch. Evelyn checked the monitor and saw static, followed by a fleeting image of a tall shadow standing at the foot of Bed 7. Her heart raced as she glanced toward the bed. It was empty, but the shadow lingered on the camera feed. Moments later, the overhead lights flickered and Evelyn heard a faint whisper. "Leave." Summoning her courage, Evelyn approached bed 7 with a digital recorder. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice trembling. The whisper grew louder, overlapping voices echoing in the air. "I was here first." Suddenly, an invisible force knocked Evelyn back, sending her sprawling to the floor. Gasping for air, she crawled out of the ICU and into the hallway. When she checked the recorder later, the whispers were audible. "This is mine. Leave now." After Evelyn's harrowing experience, the administration had no choice but to act. Bed 7 was removed from the ICU and placed in storage. However, staff members claimed they could still feel its presence in the hospital. Some said they saw the shadow lingering in the storage room, while others heard whispers in the empty ICU at night. To this day, the hospital avoids discussing the history of Bed 7. Patients and visitors remain unaware of its dark past, but those who work there know the truth. Something malevolent still resides within the walls of Redwood Memorial Hospital. Bed 7 is now more than just a piece of furniture. It is a story that continues to haunt those who encounter it. Urban explorers and ghost hunters have tried to track it down, hoping to capture proof of its curse. But the hospital remains tight-lipped, and the bed's location is a closely guarded secret. For the staff who worked there during those chilling years, the whispers of Bed 7 are a stark reminder. Some things are better left undisturbed. And for those who dare to ask about the cursed bed, the answer is always the same. Don't look for it. It will find you.